Your soulmate left one final letter. What they confessed will break your heart. Something happened last night that you were never supposed to know about, while the world around you was quiet, while most people were sleeping, while the noise of yesterday had finally faded into silence. Someone was sitting alone with a truth they had carried for far too long, and before the night ended, they wrote one final letter. Not a casual message, not a simple goodbye, not words written in anger. It was the kind of letter someone writes when they realize that keeping the truth hidden has become more painful than admitting it. They wrote it because there were things they could never say while looking into your eyes. Things they tried to bury, things they convinced themselves they had moved beyond, things that returned to them every time they heard a familiar song, remembered a certain conversation, passed a place connected to you, or found themselves alone with their thoughts. And last night, something inside them finally broke open. They stopped pretending. They stopped running from the memories. They stopped telling themselves that time would make the feeling disappear. Instead, they picked up a pen and began writing. The first words were difficult. They stared at the empty page for a long time. They wrote something, then they crossed it out. They tried again, then they stopped. Because how do you explain a feeling that has survived distance, silence, misunderstandings, pride, fear, and time? How do you tell someone that you never truly stopped caring when you spent so much energy convincing them that you did? How do you confess that the person you tried hardest to forget became the person you could never escape from in your own heart? Eventually, they wrote, I don't know if you will ever read this. I don't even know if I deserve for you to hear it, but there is something I should have told you a long time ago. I was never as indifferent as I pretended to be. Those words changed everything, because perhaps you have wondered about their silence. Perhaps you wondered why someone who once seemed so close could suddenly become distant. Perhaps you questioned whether the connection had ever meant as much to them as it meant to you. Maybe there were moments when you blamed yourself. Maybe you replayed conversations and searched for the exact moment everything changed. Maybe you asked yourself whether you had imagined the depth of the connection. But according to this letter, you didn't imagine it, they felt it too. They simply didn't know how to handle it, and that is the confession that may hurt the most. Sometimes people don't walk away because they feel nothing. Sometimes they walk away because they feel too much and don't know what to do with it. Fear can make people behave in ways that contradict their hearts. Pride can make someone stay silent when they desperately want to speak. Uncertainty can make someone hesitate at the exact moment they should be honest. And sometimes, the person who appears to have forgotten you is actually fighting the memory of you every day. The letter continued, I wanted you to believe that I was fine. I wanted everyone to believe that I was fine. I thought if I acted like I didn't care, eventually I would stop caring. I was wrong. Those 4 words carried the weight of everything they had refused to admit. They weren't fine. They had simply become good at hiding it, and perhaps you understand that feeling. There are moments when a person can smile, continue working, talk to friends, make plans, and appear completely normal while carrying an entire unfinished story inside their heart. That is what they had been doing, living normally on the outside, remembering everything on the inside. They remembered the little things, the details you probably thought nobody noticed, the way you reacted when you were excited, the expressions you made when you were trying not to laugh, the conversations that seemed ordinary at the time but became precious later, the moments when neither of you needed to say much because somehow the silence felt comfortable. They remembered the feeling of being understood without having to explain every part of themselves. And they admitted something else. You probably think I forgot. I didn't. I remembered more than I ever told you. That sentence is where the letter becomes painful, because there is a particular kind of heartbreak in realizing that someone may have cared deeply while remaining completely silent about it. You can spend months or years believing a connection meant nothing to the other person, only to discover that they were carrying their own private version of the story. But there is something important you should remember. This message isn't asking you to stop living your life and wait for someone. It isn't telling you that you must chase a person who walked away. It isn't asking you to put your future on hold. Sometimes a message like this is less about another person's return and more about understanding what happened. You deserve clarity, you deserve honesty, and most importantly, you deserve peace. The letter continued, I was afraid. That is the truth I hated admitting. I was afraid that if I gave you everything I felt, you would eventually realize that I wasn't enough. So instead of risking rejection, I created distance. Instead of telling you what you meant to me, I became quiet. Instead of asking you to stay, I convinced myself that losing you would hurt less if I chose the distance myself. Read that again, because sometimes the greatest tragedy in a connection isn't the absence of love. It is the presence of fear. Fear can turn beautiful possibilities into unfinished stories. It can make someone reject what they secretly wanted. It can convince a person that leaving first is safer than being left later, and maybe that was their mistake. They thought they were protecting themselves, but in doing so, they hurt you too. Then came the sentence they struggled the most to write, I am sorry. Not a simple apology, not an apology for one argument, not an apology for one misunderstanding, an apology for all the moments when they could have been honest and weren't. I am sorry for every time you wondered whether you mattered. You mattered. I am sorry for every time my silence made you question yourself. You were never the problem. I am sorry for making you feel replaceable when the truth is that nobody ever really replaced what I felt for you. That confession can touch a place deep inside the heart, because when someone leaves without explanation, the mind often invents explanations. Maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe they found someone better. Maybe I cared too much. Maybe I misunderstood everything. Maybe I imagined the connection. But their letter tells a different story. Their distance wasn't proof that you were unimportant. It was evidence that they didn't know how to communicate what was happening inside them, and that distinction matters. Still, don't romanticize pain. Love isn't supposed to require you to constantly decode silence. A meaningful connection needs honesty. It needs respect. It needs communication. It needs two people willing to show up. A soulmate, if you believe in the idea, should not simply be someone who causes intense emotions. It should be someone with whom growth, honesty, mutual respect, and emotional safety are possible. That is why the final part of the letter matters so much. They didn't only confess what they felt, they confessed what they regretted. I regret the conversations we never had. I regret the questions I never asked. I regret the times I wanted to reach out and convince myself that I shouldn't. I regret allowing pride to speak louder than my heart. Most of all, I regret making you believe that you were easy to forget. Then there was a long pause in the letter. Several lines were left empty, as if even after writing everything, there were still words they couldn't find. Finally, they wrote, "You were never easy to forget. You became part of the way I remember that chapter of my life, and no matter what happens from here, I will always be grateful that our paths crossed." That is not necessarily a promise of reunion, and maybe that is what makes it more powerful. Sometimes the deepest message isn't "I'm coming back." Sometimes it is, "I finally understand what I lost." There is a difference. A person can realize your value without being ready to become the person you deserve. They can miss you without knowing how to build something healthy with you. They can regret their choices without being able to undo them, and you don't have to carry the responsibility of fixing their regret. Your life is still moving. Your story is still unfolding. There are chapters ahead of you that you haven't even imagined yet. But perhaps this message found you because you have been carrying a question you never said out loud. Did they ever really care? The letter says yes, but there is another question: will they come back? That answer belongs to the future, not to a prediction. No message can guarantee what another person will choose. No sign can force someone to become emotionally ready. And no soulmate story should convince you to abandon your own path. What you can know is this: you were worthy of honesty then. You are worthy of honesty now. You were worthy of being chosen without confusion. You are worthy of being respected without having to prove your value. And you are worthy of a connection where love does not feel like a constant mystery. The letter continued with one final confession. I still think about what might have happened if I had been brave. Sometimes I imagine another version of our story, a version where I spoke sooner. A version where I admitted that I was scared, a version where I didn't let pride create distance. But I know I cannot live forever inside that version. I can only tell you the truth now. You mattered to me, you still matter to me, and I am sorry that I made you discover that through silence instead of hearing it directly from me. Then came the final line. It was short, only a few words, but perhaps they carried more meaning than everything else. I hope you choose happiness, even if it isn't with me. That is where the letter ended. And perhaps that is the message you needed, not because someone else has control over your destiny, not because you are required to wait, not because the universe is promising that someone will return at exactly the right moment, but because sometimes closure arrives when you finally understand that another person's inability to love openly was never a measurement of your worth. Maybe they loved you. Maybe they still do. Maybe they will reach out. Maybe they won't. Life is complicated. People change. Circumstances change. And sometimes two people can care deeply about each other and still need different paths, but your heart does not have to remain trapped inside an unanswered question. You can release the need to know every detail. You can forgive without reopening a door. You can remember without returning. You can love what something meant without allowing the past to control your future. And if there is one message hidden beneath this entire confession, it is this: don't chase someone simply because they finally realized your value. Let their actions speak. If someone wants another chance, they should communicate clearly. They should take responsibility. They should show consistency. They should respect your boundaries. They should demonstrate through actions what their words claim. You don't have to convince anyone to choose you. You don't have to compete for affection. You don't have to become someone else to deserve love. The right connection will not require you to disappear inside another person's uncertainty. So if you have been thinking about someone lately, take a breath. Don't panic. Don't assume every coincidence is a command. Don't force a meaning onto every dream or memory. Instead, listen to what your own heart is telling you. Maybe you miss them. Maybe you miss who you were when you were with them. Maybe you miss the possibility of what could have been. Those are not always the same thing. Sometimes we don't miss a person as much as we miss the future we imagined with them, and realizing that can be incredibly freeing. You can honor the memory without surrendering your present. You can acknowledge the connection without allowing it to define your identity. You can leave the door unlocked in your heart while still continuing down your own road. And if this message feels strangely personal, perhaps it is because somewhere inside you, there is an unfinished conversation. Maybe you have words you never said. Maybe someone else does too. Maybe there is an apology waiting somewhere. Maybe there is a truth that should have been spoken long ago. But whatever happens next, don't forget yourself while wondering about someone else. Your life is not a waiting room. Your happiness is not something that begins only when another person arrives. You are allowed to keep growing. You are allowed to laugh again. You are allowed to meet new people. You are allowed to dream about something completely different. And if someone from your past genuinely belongs in your future, they will need to meet you there with honesty, not just memories. They will need to show up with courage, not just regret. They will need to offer consistency, not just beautiful words written late at night, because the most beautiful soulmate story isn't necessarily the one where two people endlessly suffer before finally finding each other. Sometimes it is the story where two people learn, grow, become wiser, and meet again as healthier versions of themselves. Sometimes it is the story where one person finally realizes that they deserve better and chooses themselves. Sometimes it is the story where closure becomes the beginning of peace, and sometimes, unexpectedly, it becomes the beginning of something new. But tonight, don't worry about the ending. The letter has already said what needed to be said. You mattered. You were remembered. The connection was not meaningless, and the silence you experienced was not proof that you lacked value. Perhaps they were simply fighting battles you couldn't see. Perhaps they were afraid. Perhaps they were immature. Perhaps they didn't know how to communicate. Perhaps timing separated two people who genuinely cared. Whatever the reason, you don't have to carry the blame for it. Put down the weight of that old question. Stop asking whether you were enough. You were never supposed to earn your right to be loved. You were never supposed to beg someone to recognize your heart. You were never supposed to shrink yourself so another person could feel comfortable staying. The person meant to share your life should be able to appreciate your presence without requiring you to constantly prove your worth. So if this final letter reached you emotionally, let it remind you of something simple. Some people enter our lives to stay. Some enter to teach. Some return after growth. Some remain beautiful memories. And some become the reason we finally learn how deeply we are capable of loving ourselves. You don't have to know which one this person will be, you only have to keep moving forward, and if they truly have something left to say, let them say it. If they truly want another chance, let them demonstrate it. If they truly regret what happened, let their actions carry the apology. You don't have to chase the answer. You don't have to force the reunion. You don't have to spend another night staring at your phone, wondering whether a message will appear. Live, grow, laugh, dream. Become the person you were always meant to become. Because maybe the greatest confession hidden inside that final letter wasn't about them at all. Maybe it was about you. Maybe it was the reminder that you survived the silence. You survived the unanswered questions. You survived the distance. You survived the moment when you thought the connection meant nothing. And now you are standing on the other side of it with a heart that still knows how to hope. That is not weakness, that is strength. So tonight, if you remember them gently. Don't punish yourself for caring. Don't be ashamed of the memories. Don't pretend the connection never mattered just because the story didn't unfold the way you expected. Some chapters can be meaningful even when they don't become permanent, and sometimes the final letter isn't an invitation to go backward. Sometimes it is permission to finally move forward. The words were written, the truth was confessed, the apology was given, the rest belongs to time, and perhaps somewhere, in another quiet room, someone is finally realizing that losing you taught them something they should have understood when you were still there. A heart that loves sincerely should never be taken for granted, so let this be the end of the question that kept you awake. Let it be the end of wondering whether you mattered. You did. But your worth does not depend on whether someone from your past finally admits it. Your worth was there before they met you. It remains after they leave. And it will still be there when someone new enters your life and recognizes it without needing to lose you first. Maybe that is the real divine message. Not that someone is destined to return, not that every sign guarantees a reunion, but that love is supposed to lead you toward greater truth, greater self-respect, greater peace, and a deeper understanding of who you are. If two souls are truly meant to cross paths again, life will create another opportunity, and if they are not, then perhaps the ending was making space for something neither of you could see yet. Either way, don't fear the future. The story isn't over. That final letter may have closed one chapter, but your life still has countless pages left, and somewhere beyond this moment, there are conversations you haven't had, places you haven't seen, people you haven't met, dreams you haven't imagined, and versions of yourself you haven't discovered. So breathe, release what you cannot control, keep what was beautiful, learn from what was painful, and walk forward with your heart open. But your standard strong, because the love you deserve should not leave you constantly guessing. It should not make you feel invisible. It should not require you to chase. It should not make you question whether you are enough. The love you deserve will meet you with honesty. It will meet you with respect. It will meet you with consistency. And when it does, you won't have to decode a final letter to understand how someone feels. You will know. Until then, let the past rest. Let the unanswered questions become quiet, and remember the final confession one last time: you mattered, you were never forgotten, and I am sorry I waited so long to tell you. Perhaps those words were meant to break your heart. But perhaps they were also meant to free it, and maybe that is where the real meaning of the letter begins. Because sometimes we spend so much time waiting for another person to explain themselves that we forget to listen to what our own heart has been trying to tell us. Maybe you have been waiting for an apology. Maybe you have been waiting for an explanation. Maybe you have been waiting for one final sentence that would make everything suddenly make sense. You imagine that if they could only tell you why they left, why they became distant, why they stopped talking, why they changed, or why they seemed to move on so easily, then the ache inside you would finally disappear. But healing doesn't always arrive through another person's explanation. Sometimes healing begins when you stop needing one, and perhaps that is why this final letter feels